All right, guys, we have a very, very, very exciting video today. Now, why is this video exciting? Because I was just taken out to a beautiful birthday dinner. Thank you, my family. And I've had a few beers, okay? So we're going to take that energy and we're going to use that to appreciate my new favorite poem. And more specifically, my new favorite poem is The Ship by Paul Valery. So Paul Valery was so... Gebser complimented him so much in The Ever-Present Origin, so I thought, well, shit, why don't I try? And this is a really great book if you want to get into poetry. All the poems here are pretty short, pretty relatively simple. Now, some of you might make fun of me because my favorite poem is short, but as my exes will attest, sometimes the smallest things pack the biggest punch, so joke's on you. So what we're going to do today is we're going to appreciate The Ship by Paul Valery. Not just analyze it, because analyze it, that's mental structure stuff, and that's fine, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but we're not just using that, so I'm not just going to use analyze. I'm going to read the whole poem, take it line by line, then we're going to read it again. I think it's a beautiful poem. I remember I had about 2 hours to read some Gebser, and I thought, well, why don't I take 15-20 minutes to read some of these poems to kind of get my brain warmed up. I hit this poem, and I was like, okay, I guess I'm spending the next 2 hours just rereading this like 80 times and just appreciating the hell out of it and trying to pick apart the symbolism. So let's talk about first. I apologize. I have no notes in this video, if you can't tell. I have no notes. I'm just kind of freestyling. And I think we should start first with my approach going into this. So as someone new to poetry, as someone who is beyond a novice, or below a novice, I should say, I always remembered one thing that Gebser said, or more specifically that Picasso said that Gebser quoted in his book. The mindset that I would recommend going into poetry is this, by Picasso: I do not seek, I find. That is a Picasso maxim. It is the maxim that helps you understand integral consciousness better than anything. So if you say I seek, well, that's goal-oriented. Well, if it's goal-oriented, that's obviously the mental structure, right? The problem is with seeking is you put blinders on. So when you seek, let's say symbolism in a particular poetry, what you're doing is you're blinding yourself to the other things. You're blinding yourself to the qualities revealed through a sort of pre-rational and irrational subsumption into the poem, the qualities revealed during the experience of reading that poem. You're also missing the prose to an extent. You're missing themes. You're missing all sorts of stuff. You're just focusing on symbolism. And when you do that, you're standing outside the poem. You're not letting the poem breathe within you. Not necessarily a bad thing, but it becomes a bad thing when you exclusively employ it that way. So the mindset I had going into this book, and again, I'm only 30 pages in, so don't think I'm coming down from the heavens to, proclaim my ultimate authority in poetry. That's not it. But that's kind of the mindset I went into, and I think it was really, really good for me to do that, because some poems in this are steeped in symbolism, and that's what The Ship is. It's steeped in symbolism. We're going to talk about it. But other poems are just beautiful descriptions. Now, if I went in seeking symbolism above all else, I'd be essentially looking for things where they're not there. And if I'm looking for things when they're not there, I'm not really engaging with the poem on Valery's level. And if I'm not doing that, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I feel like you're missing something, especially when it gets to just these sort of base descriptions of, not base in the sense of they're poorly written, but base in the sense of there's not too much symbolism going on. Sometimes you miss just the pure beauty of it. Not everything is symbolism. Sometimes you just want the prose and the beauty and the beautiful images that were created just to kind of just bathe in it, you know what I mean? Remember, I do not seek, I find. That is the maxim for all of integral consciousness. We're done with I'm not saying you negate the goal-oriented stuff, but it's not only what we're doing. I'm going to have to take many water breaks during this. I'm sorry. All right. Do I want to expand on? I guess the final thing I'll say on that is when you go in allowing the poem to reveal itself to you, you experience and input its entirety, the entire plenitude of the poem, not just a part that you've sought. Just keep that in mind, all right? Because, well, I'll get to it once we get into the poem. So this poem is very short. It's only 16 lines, and I'm just going to read it all at once, and then we'll come back line by line. So, The Ship by Paul Valery. Having cleaved for years the crystalline blue sea, Soulless mirror rising and falling in melodious cadence. The vessel, old voyager of many a port of call, returns to drop anchor in the port whence, one evening, she set forth. Scent of a dear departed one stowed in a drawer. The fragrance of the waves behind lingers in the somber holds. Sugar, tobacco, tropical swells permeate the silent black hulk. Returning from distant love, thus my soul preserves the scent of dreams of old, and cannot forget a certain voice and a certain woman's name. But what ship has left its trace on the ocean and its memory through the past? I think that is beautiful. I love the prose. I love the diction. I love everything about it. But that's kind of surface level stuff. And as great as that is, let's get deeper into it. So now let's just take it line by line. Having cleaved for years the crystalline blue sea. Now, let me start with this, actually. So when I read this poem as a whole for the first time, allowing the poem to reveal itself to me, rather than seeking, I recognized that, intuitively, that there seemed to be symbolism at play here. In other poems in this collection, in this book, it's not. There's no symbolism. There's just straight description, like I mentioned earlier. So this, I guess the point I'm trying to make is, I didn't go into this knowing that this would be symbolism. I allowed the symbolism to come to me, and in turn, I was more playful with it. I was more, I don't want to say accurate with it, but I was more insightful with it, and I could understand the poem much quicker and to a far greater qualitative degree because of that, because I wasn't sort of misunderstanding it. Let's go again. Having cleaved for years the crystalline blue sea. So the reason I mentioned that symbolism is because we have the crystalline blue sea. Now, on its own, that doesn't necessarily reveal that symbolism is at play here, because it could just be a base description of the crystalline blue sea, or the blue sea could be a symbol. Having cleaved for years the crystalline blue sea, soulless mirror rising and falling in melodious cadence. So this is very, very, very interesting, and it's going to lead to another big point. So he describes the crystalline blue sea. He says, having cleaved for years to it, soulless, what does he say directly after this? Soulless, that's a big point, mirror rising and falling in melodious cadence. Two big points. One, the crystalline blue sea is a symbol. And we know it's a symbol because he pretty much just tells us, soulless mirror rising and falling, right? But here's the interesting part, and this is another important point. If you follow my Gebser series, you know that the water is a symbol for the life pole of the soul, right? It is a symbol for the life pole of the soul, whether because it cleans, it washes away, it births, all these, it's pure, it's deep, it's all this stuff, right? But here, the crystalline blue sea is explicitly described as soulless, a soulless mirror rising and falling in melodious cadence. So we know that the crystalline blue sea is not the soul. We know that. It's a soulless mirror rising and falling. That seems to signal that something else is at play that represents the soul. So I believe when it says soulless mirror, the blue sea represents not the soul, but life itself, or time itself, the vast expansiveness of experience, life, and time that we move through in a more rational sense in a daily basis. So let's continue. The vessel, old voyager of many port of call, returns to drop anchor in port whence one evening she set forth. So this is interesting. So when he says the soulless mirror rising and falling in melodious cadence, he says, that signals to me a certain degree of polar complementarity. So you mentioned soulless, and that can't help but bring to mind the soul, which is obviously sort of a compliment, if you want to call it that. Rising and falling in melodious cadence. There's a certain harmony there. And if there's a certain harmony, if it's rising and falling, that signals a sort of natural movement, a natural tide of beginning, blossoming, and ending. That signals to me, and I could be wrong, this is just my interpretation, he's touching on polar complementarity here. So next stanza. Scent of a dear departed one stowed in a drawer. Actually, hold on. I should make a point before I move to the next stanza. So notice the ship, right? So if the ship travels on the water and the water is falling in that melodious cadence, well, then the ship is also falling in alignment with that melodious cadence. And if the ship is the soul, as I'm about to make the argument in the next stanza, well, that seems to reinforce my argument that the soulless mirror, that is the crystalline blue sea, is actually like I said, the expansiveness of life itself, the sort of vastness of life itself. Now, here's a very interesting fact. Remember what I said earlier. I do not seek, I find. As you guys know, I teach the Jean Gebser series. As I mentioned, water symbolism is life. There's an inversion being played here. Valery, for whatever reason, is inverting the traditional symbolism of the blue sea, or water, and the vessel, the old voyager. So because the water is so alive, and it's always moving, and it's so deep, and it represents the soul, it's a sort of active, dynamic phenomenon. Well, the vessel, the ship, is this sort of empty, hard, static, soulless, traditionally at least, object or phenomenon. It's very interesting that he inverts this. And the point I'm trying to make here is, if I would have went in there with Gebser dogmatically taking on Gebser's view, I would have never understood this poem. I would have completely missed it. It would never have been as profound to me. I would have missed the entire point. Remember, I do not seek, I find. And to be clear, if I had Jean Gebser right here standing next to me, he himself would be like, yeah, if you need to drop what I'm saying, like, just discover it yourself. It's a general principle. It's a general rule. So don't get lost. So the vessel, old voyager. Okay. The vessel, old voyager of many port of call, returns to drop anchor in port whence one evening she set forth. So the vessel, when he says voyager of many port of call, that signals to me that the soul has experienced many different situations and circumstances, many a port of call, but returns to drop anchor in the port whence one evening she set forth. Interesting. Remember the polar complementarity we talked about with the soulless mirror and the soul ship. There's a complementarity here. Maybe he's suggesting that time itself is not too different from the moment you are born than the moment you will die, in a strictly measurable sense. Or maybe it's emotional return. You're returning to that emotional point of origin, that emotional base. Either way, there's a complementarity here. Next stanza. Scent of a dear departed one stowed in a drawer. Now this is interesting. This right here signals to me that the ship is the soul. Because just as the ship stores the scent of a dear departed one in a drawer, so does the soul store the scent, if you will, of a dear departed one in its sustenance, right? So, personally, when my friends die, it's very sad, but I preserve them in my soul. Their scents, if you will, metaphorically of course, are retained or preserved by the soul. They're stored in a drawer. Another piece of evidence suggesting that the ship is the soul, counterintuitively, and that the water is not. The fragrance of the waves behind lingers in the somber holds. Now this is very interesting. So we have another notice the connection between scent and fragrance. So it's interesting that he's using almost the nose and all that surrounds it as sort of a literary device, if you will. So the fragrance of the waves behind lingers in the somber holds. Remember, this is symbolic. So when he says the waves behind, well, behind means in the past, right? And the waves are up and down, up and down, up and down. And if the waves belong to the blue sea, and the blue sea is the expansive world, I think, and that's behind, I think what he's saying is memories of the past, especially waves where you are taken up and then brought down, taken up and then brought down, very intense times, those are preserved by the soul. Those are preserved by your inner constitution. And it's also interesting that he mentions in the somber holds. In the somber holds. So memory does not always bring about positivity. It can bring about waves that linger in the somber holds, some things that might not be properly yet integrated. So the fragrance of the waves behind lingers in the somber holds. Sugar, tobacco, tropical swells. So this signals to me the diversity of experiences. When you go to different ports, maybe sometimes you return with sugar. Maybe sometimes you return with tobacco or tropical swells. Permeate the silent black hulk. So the silent black hulk signals to me either the unconscious or the soul, and that these diverse preservances, like he says, permeate that. Now this stanza is very, very, very important, because I believe, and maybe I'm being a little too Gebserian here, is this not a pretty beautiful sort of explanation, for lack of a better term, of the past being integrated into the present moment, that the past is not something distant and behind, but something that is present and effectual and contained within the present moment, just as the future is? I don't really see how you could come to a different conclusion. Maybe I'm just missing it. I mean, when he says the fragrance of the waves behind lingers in the somber holds, that seems to suggest that even though if it's a little more faint than it was when the moment you experienced that past wave, it's still there. The scent of a dear departed is still in the drawer. It is still there, and they permeate the silent black hulk. So the past is integrated into the future. Beautiful. Returning from distant love. That's another point. How is it possible, in a chronological sense, to return from a distant love? What does that mean? Now, distant can also have two meanings here. So distant could be, maybe I loved this woman 10 years ago, and I'm returned. How is it possible, if you loved this woman 10 years ago, that you could return from that distant love in the present moment? Doesn't make sense. It only doesn't make sense from the rational, strictly chronological, step-by-step, 10 p.m., then 10:01, then 10:02, the past is something behind you. Then, in that sense, yes, it doesn't make sense. But if you read it as I believe it to be read, where the past is integrated into the future, it makes complete sense that you will return from the distant love, because the love is in the past, and the past is in the present. So you can return from it at any time. Returning from distant love. Thus my soul preserves the scent of dreams of old. Beautifully said. I mean, if I almost don't even want to explain it. The dreams of old. But as explained in the previous stanza, sometimes those dreams are not always positive. Sometimes those dreams are, unfortunately, negative. And cannot forget a certain voice. So this is interesting. I'm not quite sure what he means by voice. It could be the voice of God, but I don't think it is. I think it's a voice of a woman, but I kind of have a spoiler here. But he hears a certain voice. So again, something from the past, when integrated into the present, leaves a presence, is effectual in the soul of the man, the ship, right? The ship is affected by what it contains. Same with the soul, right? Now, don't get too lost in the spatial descriptions there, because the soul is immeasurable, it's immaterial, it's aspatial. So don't get lost in there. I'm just using that as an analogy. But the point is that what the soul preserves affects the soul in a sort of perpetual integration. And cannot forget a certain voice and a certain woman's name. Now here, this is the best thing about Valery. He builds this up, and then he completely flips it with the last two lines. I almost want to read this last stanza on its own again. And a certain woman's name, but what ship has left its trace on the ocean and its memory through the past? How beautiful is that? How beautiful is that? And he totally flips it here. So let's think about what he says. So what ship has left its trace on the ocean? The ship is the human soul. The ocean is the personal soul. Let's put it that way. The ship is the personal soul. The ocean is the impersonal world. What ship has left its trace on the ocean? So think about what's happened in this poem. The ship, having cleaved for years to the crystalline blue sea, has the voyager of many port of call, has a scent of a dear departed one stowed in a drawer. The fragrance of the waves behind lingers in the somber holds. Sugar, tobacco, tropical swells permeate the silent black hulk. As the ship, the soul, goes to many different ports, aka accrues many different experiences, the world sort of imprints itself. The ocean imprints itself on the ship, right? And we know that because the past, present, future are all integrated into the present and the soul, yada, yada, yada. We know how that works. But now he flips it. He says, but what ship has left its trace on the ocean? Now, this is very poignant in my opinion, because think about an actual ship. Think about the waves that it leaves as it's floating about or moving through the ocean. There are all these waves in the background. What does nature do immediately? It just covers those waves as if they never existed. What happens if I go out in the woods right now and I pick up a stick and I draw a line through it, right? Eventually, given enough time span, the weather that I'm living in, probably 40 seconds, wind is going to come up and it's going to completely destroy it. Everything you do in this sort of impersonal external world will eventually be erased. Every trace of it will be erased by nature. And yet, this impersonal nature is exactly which imprints itself upon the soul. What ship has ever left its trace on the ocean? So I think what Valery is suggesting here is that it's not the permanence of external actions or external effects on the world that make life meaningful. It is the preservance of impermanent, capricious experiences by the soul that make life meaningful. This reminds me of Cormac McCarthy's famous, I don't want to say monologue, but famous sort of piece in The Crossing, where he says, it is true that time, what does he say? It's true that, for lack of a better term, it's true that time heals all wounds, but only at the cost of removing the dearly departed from its proper home, the human heart. You must speak its name and keep it alive, right? So if you allow, like let's take me, for example. I unfortunately have had some friends pass away. It's very sad. If I allow the fact that they are no longer here, that they have been rendered impermanent, and that the cold, cruel, indifferent world doesn't care about them, has completely erased them from existence as if they didn't matter. Well, guess what? They matter in here, my friend. You know why they matter in here? Because they've shaped me. I remember sitting with my friends. I remember his advice. I remember his warmth, his wit, whatever it is. So meaning is not necessarily conferred by an impersonal and different world, and it should not be sought by seeking validation from that world, but is arrived at through investigating what the soul has preserved through many different ports of calls, if you will, through many different experiences in life. Love loss, loss of friends, lots of parents, joy, maybe, you graduate school or whatever it is. I think that's very important, and I think it's very important. And I think, well, I'll give you guys sort of a positive, optimistic reading of this, but I think Valery's almost a little too smart for that, because Valery's an integral thinker. I think what Valery's doing here is saying, for better or worse, the world remembers nothing, but humans remember everything. And we're going to get to the worst in a second, because I think there's a cool connection to be made. But I think what he's doing here, remember, now if this was a purely positive message that you could take from this poem, he wouldn't mention things like the fragrance of waves behind lingers in the somber holds. I mean, somber obviously has negative connotations. Returning from distant love, and cannot forget a certain voice and a certain woman's name with an ellipses, ... That signals to me, at least, that there's a sort of love loss. There's a sort of regret there. There's a sort of impermanence there. So I think, again, you could say that memory is just something that, memory when integrated with the soul brings about only positive effects, but I think Valery's too smart for that. I think what he's doing is he's representing the co-validity of the negative and the positive through memory's integration with the soul. When that happens, this happens. And you remove good and bad for a second. Let's just sort of bathe in this truth. Very interesting. But let's do a positive reading before we do a negative reading. So a positive reading, kind of like I was touching on earlier. The world remembers nothing. The soul remembers everything. It doesn't matter if your accomplishments or something you really care about in the world is rendered impermanent by the world. It doesn't matter if the world subsumes and destroys every single thing you love in this world, because it's not about the things out there. The world, the indifferent world, was never going to give you that meaning. It was never going to give you that. What gives you that is the soul's preservance of that, the conscious and perpetual integration of the past into the present. That is what's going to give you meaning. For example, I did my movie collection, my little Blu-rays. Very good. I love those things, and they're amazing. God forbid if someone were to steal them, it would make me sad. But remember, it's not about the collection itself. It's not about the bare physical things in the indifferent world. It's about what my soul preserved from watching those films. And that will always shape me, because I've taken lessons, good or bad, from them. It's not that my friend has passed away. That doesn't mean that the world is meaningless. That doesn't mean that the world is necessarily only a cruel, indifferent place, because guess what? Humans populate it, and humans preserve meaning. The human soul preserves meaning, not just the seemingly indifferent world. So I think what Valery's touching on is an asymmetry. And he's also revealing that the human has the power to make life meaningful. It's the soul that will sort of rise above, if you will. Now, I think you could also use this when you feel you're not making an impact in the world, when you are working some shitty desk job and you're not doing anything It doesn't matter. The world was never going to give you your permanent external praise, because if the world will erase every trace of the effect of Alexander the Great, it sure as hell is going to do that to you. Excuse me. It's not about that. It's about the human journey through that. It's about what the soul preserves. It's about integration. It's about all that things. I don't want to get too repetitive. I'm sorry. But now let's get to a negative interpretation. So I think the asymmetry here, I actually think Judge Holden touches upon this. Now, if you should watch my Judge Holden analysis, because I think it's a good video, and I love me some Judge Holden. Hey, Blood Meridian. And remember what I said in that video. Remember when he says, when he's talking to the kid at the very end of the movie, and he asks a line that I've stolen 1 trillion times. He's asking the kid about their past experiences together. And he says, did you post witnesses? And the kid's like, what? He goes, did you post witnesses to report on the continuing existence of, let's say, the hotel in Arizona or the hotel in Chihuahua, we'll say. And of course the kid says no, he has no way of countering this sort of line of questioning. So think about what the judge is doing here. I think what the judge is doing is he's recognizing this cold indifference from the world, and the fact that the world erases any trace. Given a long enough time span, it will erase all traces of events that happened at a particular point, as is the case with him and the kid. So him and the kid did all this terrible stuff, right? They were killing people, scalping people. Let's say there's blood dripped all over the cobblestones, and there's just dead people lying out. Well, guess what? 20 years later, they cleaned up all the blood, right? And if they didn't clean up the blood, the dirt would have done it for them. And they clean up all the dead people, and it's almost as if nothing happened. It's as if the event itself didn't happen. But of course, the event itself did happen because the soul preserved the event. And how do I know the soul preserved the event? Because the judge is mentioning it in the first place. If the event didn't actually happen, you would have... How could you have an accurate memory of it so when you bring it up, both of you know exactly what you're talking about? It doesn't make sense. He's recognized the cruel indifference of the world, and I think the judge, in his will to power, rejects this entirely. The judge says, no, the cruel indifference of the world, the erasing of all traces of my effect on it, will not stand. Why? Because that signals that the world is more powerful than I am. I will not have that. So this is why the judge scribbles in his notebook. This is why he learns everything about everything, about he tries to control and manipulate the world, because the judge has recognized this asymmetry, and he's taken a negative interpretation of it. He says, no, the fact that you're indifferent and I take this personally is a bad thing, because you have more power than me, you hurt me, and I don't like it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to conquer the world, so that the world, if the world erases the trace of anyone's action on it, guess what? That'll be my consciousness that does it, because I am the ultimate suzerain. I am the ultimate player in the game of will to power, and I will defeat not only every man on this world, but the world itself. So I think we'll end it there. Let me know if you guys found this somewhat profound. Let me know if you guys... By the way, here's another great thing. I kind of reject the subjective-objective dichotomy, because I think it's a non-starter. I'm trying to think of a situation where there's ever been a human experience that has been either fully subjective or fully objective, and I don't think there is. I think every moment, literally every moment of human existence, is the integration of the subjective and objective. So I kind of reject that binary. But if you insist on using it, this is subjective. So you don't have to find this profound. You can say, wow, Justin, you're a moron. I cannot believe you found this little 14-page poem. I can't believe you found that profound. What is this? This is absurd. This is nothing. Go read Walt Whitman. Go read T.S. Eliot. Great. Let me know. You don't have to find what I find subjective. So go find your own meaning. If you want to go read Dr. Seuss, go read Dr. Seuss. Go read Willy Wonka. I don't care. Just find that meaning. Integrate the soul. Feed the soul. And you will live a more holistic and a simply better life. Because I guarantee you, when I'm feeling down, when I'm feeling insignificant, when someone has lost, when someone has hurt me or gone away, and I know I won't see them again, I ask myself, what ship has ever left its trace on the ocean? Thank you, guys.